Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and good morning. Welcome to today's E-Forum and Issues in Science Education in Malaysia. Recent research suggests that while Malaysian science and STEM teachers demonstrate moderate to high adoption of integrated STEM elements and challenges actually persist in disciplinary integration and pedagogical enactment. For example, Anathan et al. 2022 reported uneven classroom translation of STEM policy, while Suling, Pang, and Lajum in 2020 say that teachers' pedagogical content knowledge in integrated STEM remains a significant constraint, is what we say. So, hence, our focus today is actually both timely and crucial. How has the revision of Malaysia's national science curriculum to embrace STEM philosophy reshape science teachers, professional lives, classroom practices, workload, and competencies, and also identity? Because when we review this through the lens of the philosophy of science, the national philosophy of education, and the philosophy of national science education. Hence, this forum is grounded in three philosophical pillars. First one, the national philosophy of education (NPE), which envisions holistic individuals intellectually, spiritually, emotionally, and physically balanced. Second one, the philosophy of national science education (PNACE), which emphasizing scientific literacy, inquiry, ethics, and contribution to national development. And last but not least, the philosophy of science, which we know frames science as tentative, empirical, theory-laden, and socially embedded. Well, members of the floor, Malaysia's Ministry of Education has translated these ideals into STEM-oriented reforms through KSSR and KSSM revisions, inquiry-based learning, computational thinking, engineering design process, project-based learning, digital integration, and also the Industrial Revolution 4.0 alignment. Well, we know that policy does not operate in isolation because the lived experience of reform is actually carried primarily by teachers like us. So, to explore this, we have three distinguished panelists. Panelist one, Iskandar Mirza, will explain about the philosophical alignment and the curriculum intention. Panelist two, Muhammad AFZAM will deliberately elucidate the classroom realities and teachers' challenges. And last but not least, ALISYAKAR will explain the assessment, equity, and future sustainability. Well, I, Muhammad SAHIR, as the moderator for this forum today, will also contribute by critically linking policy text with systemic implications. Well, members of the floor, let us begin with round one. So, panelist one, could you begin by explaining why Malaysia turned to STEM from a philosophical and policy standpoint and what this means for teachers, please?
Thank you, Mr. Sahir, as the moderator. So, to begin with, we must understand the real impact of a STEM-oriented science curriculum on teachers. We cannot only begin at the classroom level. Why? Because we must first examine the philosophical intentions behind the reform itself. So, the fundamental question is, why did Malaysia move towards STEM in science education? So the answer lies in the alignment of three major philosophical foundations that guide our education system. So the first one, alignment with the National Philosophy of Education (NPE). So the so the National Philosophy of Education envisions education as a continuous effort to develop individuals who are intellectually, spiritually, emotionally, and physically balanced, grounded in belief in and devotion to God. So a STEM-oriented curriculum operationalize this vision through collaborative learning, engagement with real-world problems, ethical discussions surrounding science and technology, sustainability-focused projects, and creativity and innovation. As a result, the role of science teachers expands significantly. Teachers are no longer positioned merely as transmitters of scientific facts, but as educators of holistic individuals, guiding students to think critically, act ethically, and apply knowledge meaningfully. So the second one, STEM through the lens of philosophy of science. From the perspective of philosophy of science itself, STEM reflects the understanding that science is tentative and evolving, empirical in nature, theory-driven, and socially and culturally embedded. So this philosophical stance demands a major pedagogical shift. Science teachers are now expected to facilitate inquiry rather than deliver lecture, guide students through uncertainty and open-ended problems, encourage them as evidence-based argumentation, and integrate modeling, design, and engineering constraints into learning. So, in a sense, teachers are required to teach students how to think like scientists and engineers rather than simply teaching scientific content. So, the third one, as the Mr. Sahir said before, the philosophy of national science education, PNSE. So the philosophy of national science education emphasizes scientific literacy, inquiry skills, ethical responsibility, and the preparation of citizens who can contribute to national development. Within this framework, STEM position science teachers as the first one, the contributors to human capital development, the second one, the cultivators of national scientifically literate citizen, and the last one, agents of national readiness for IR 5.0. So through STEM, teachers are entrusted with preparing students for emerging and strategic fields such as green technology, artificial intelligence, health science, and renewable energy and smart manufacturing. So this elevates the science teaching profession beyond pedagogy and it becomes a strategic national role. So what is the implication for teachers' responsibility identity? So this is where the impact becomes most profound. A STEM-oriented curriculum requires science teachers to function as the first one, interdisciplinary learning designers, competent users of educational technology, facilitators of inquiry and project-based learning, interpreters of curriculum policy, and the mentors for student innovation. Consequently, teachers experience as philosophical shift in professional identity. So the narrative will change from maybe I teach biology or I teach physics to I design STEM learning experience that integrates science, technology, engineering, and mathematics to address real societal challenge in Malaysia. So this vision is undeniably inspiring, but it is also highly demanding in terms of expertise, time, and systematic support. So to conclude my talk, from a philosophical and policy perspective, Malaysia's STEM-oriented science curriculum reform is conceptually strong, forward-looking, and well-aligned with national aspiration. However, its success ultimately depends on how effectively science teachers are supported in translating these philosophical ideas into classroom practice. And that is precisely why the next segments of this panel discussion are so crucial. I think that's all from me from now. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Iskandar, for the such a wonderful thought. Well, what struck me the most is how coherently these reforms echo the philosophical aspirations, where Ministry of Education (MOE) curriculum documents such as the DSKP KSSM revisions from 2017 until 2023 explicitly reference inquiry, cross-disciplinary learning, and also technological literacy. Well, this mirrors finding by Hashim and Yaakob in 2021 in the Malaysian Journal of Learning and Instruction, who argue that STEM reforms in Malaysia are philosophically inconsistent with the NPE's holistic vision. Well, philosophy often looks elegant on paper. So let us now descend from policy architecture to classroom ground level. So, panelists two, I would like to ask to enact these ideals.
Thank you, Muhammad
And
Sahih,
actually,
as
from
the
panelists two
moderator.
point of view, what changes and tension do you see? Yes.
Thank you, Muhammad Sahih, as the moderator. From the classroom perspective, STEM reform have brought noticeable and largely positive changes to science teaching and learning in Malaysia. Over the past decade, we have witnessed a gradual but meaningful shift in how science is taught, how students learn, and how teachers perceive their professional roles. These changes reflect a broader transformation in our education system, moving away from content heavy, examination oriented practices toward more meaningful, student centered learning experience. Traditionally, science lessons in many classrooms relied heavily on chalk and talk methods, textbook explanation, and rote memorization of facts and formulas. While this approach allowed for content coverage, it often limited students' opportunities to think critically, ask questions, and apply scientific knowledge to real-world contexts. STEM education reform has challenged this model by encouraging teachers to adopt more active, inquiry-driven, and learner-centered pedagogies. Today, many science teachers are increasingly implementing approaches such as project-based learning, inquiry cycles, design thinking, real-world case study, and the use of digital simulation and data analysis tools. In this classroom, students are no longer passive recipients of information. Instead, they are actively involved in the learning process. For example, that I can give is rather than simply learning about water pollution from a textbook, students may be tasked with designing and testing water filtration using locally available materials. Instead of memorizing environmental concepts, they might analyze real environmental data, investigate climate patterns, or evaluate the impact of human activities on ecosystem. In physics and engineering related topics, students are encouraged to design prototypes, test variables, identify flaws, and improve their design through iteration. This learning experience requires students to collaborate, communicate, think critically, and solve problems, which is that are essential for 21st century. This pedagogical shift aligns strongly with constructivist learning theory, which emphasizes that learners actively construct knowledge through experience, reflection, and social interaction. Students learn more effectively when they are engaged in meaningful tasks that require them to explore ideas, test hypotheses, and make sense of evidence. STEM-based instruction provides precisely this type of learning environment. At the same time, this reform reflects the nature of science, which views scientific knowledge not as fixed or absolute, but as evolving, tentative, and shaped by inquiry, evidence, and human interpretation. Through inquiry-based STEM activities, students begin to understand that science is not just a collection of facts to be memorized for examination. Instead, it is a dynamic process that involves questioning, investigating, analyzing data, and revising explanation based on evidence. This understanding helps students develop a more authentic and accurate view of science and scientific practice. For another significant impact of STEM reform can be seen in teacher professional development. STEM education has expanded opportunities for teachers to continuously enhance their knowledge, skill, and pedagogical practices. Teachers are now exposed to a wide range of professional learning platforms, including structured workshop, micro-credential courses, professional learning communities, massive open online courses, and industry school partnership. Through this initiative, teachers are encouraged to learn new teaching strategies, integrate technology effectively, and stay updated with current scientific and technological development. Collaboration within professional learning communities allows teachers to share best practices, reflect on classroom challenges, and co-develop innovative lesson ideas. Industry partnership, in particular, help teachers understand how STEM knowledge is applied in real-world contexts, enabling them to design more relevant and authentic learning experience for students. As a result, many teachers now view themselves not merely as content delivers, but as facilitators of learning and, importantly, as lifelong learners. This shift in teachers' identity is significant. It aligns closely with the national philosophy of education, which emphasizes the holistic development of individuals who are intellectually, spiritually, emotionally, and physically balanced. When teachers model continuous learning, curiosity, and adaptability, they send a powerful message to students about the value of education beyond examination. For the student's perspective, this change have contributed to increased engagement, motivation, and relevance in science learning. Students are more likely to participate actively when lessons are connected to real-life issues, local contexts, and future careers. STEM-based activities allow students to see the relevance of science in addressing society challenges such as environmental sustainability, public health, energy efficiency, and technological innovation. This relevance had fostered intrinsic motivation and a deeper appreciation for science. However, it is also important to acknowledge that the implementation of STEM reform is not without challenges. Teachers face constraints such as limited instructional time, large class size, examination pressure, and varying level of access to resource and technology. Some teachers may feel less confident integrating engineering or technology component, especially if they lack sufficient training or support. This challenge highlights the need for sustained professional development, strong leadership support, and policy alignment between curriculum goals and assessment practice. From the classroom perspective, STEM education reform in Malaysia initiate a positive transformation in science teaching and learning. By promoting student-centered pedagogies, aligning with constructivist theory and the nature of science, and supporting continuous teacher professional development, STEM reform have made science learning more engaging, meaningful, and relevant. While challenges remain, the progress we are seeing suggests that with continued support, collaboration, and reflection, STEM education has the potential to further strengthen our education system and prepare students to thrive in an increasingly complex and interconnected world. I think that's all from me for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, panelists, too, for the great insight. Well, your remarks resonate strongly with Zakaria and Iksan in 2019 in Asia Pacific Science Education that observed Malaysian STEM classroom actually flourish with inquiry and projects that prioritize, yet are constrained by examination pressure. Well, the contradiction you raise, including innovation against the accountability, is perhaps the central philosophical tension of this reform. Well, assessment reform was meant to solve that. So, which brings us naturally to panelist three. So, panelist three, I would like to ask, how do assessment systems and equity structures interact with STEM ideals? And actually, what does this mean for teachers? Please explain.
Okay, thank you, moderator. From a philosophical point of view, STEM education requires us to rethink assessment. Assessment should not only be a way to measure students' mark or achievements. It also reflects what we believe about learning and knowledge. In other words, the way we assess students show what we think is important in education. Assessment is never natural. It tells us what kind of learning we value. It shows whether we care more about memorizing facts or about understanding ideas. It also shows whose knowledge and skills are recognized in the classroom. In the past, science assessment mainly focused on content recall, correct answer, and following procedures accurately. Students were trust Students were tested on their ability to memorize scientific facts, repeat definitions, and carry out experiments step by step. This approach reflects a traditional view of science. In this view, knowledge is seen as fixed and objective. Teachers delivers information and students receive and repeat it. However, STEM education challenge this traditional view. Modern science is not about collecting facts. It is about asking questions, solving problems, analyzing evidence, and building explanation. Scientific knowledge developed over time through investigation, discussion, collaboration, and reflection. It is also influenced by society, technology, and real life situation. If we accept this understanding of science, then our assessment method must also change. Assessment in STEM education should not only measure what students know, it should also look at how they think, how they reason, how they work with others, and how they apply knowledge in new or real life situations. Assessment should help us understand students' thinking process, not just their final answer. In Malaysia, this philosophical shift has influenced education policy. One important step is the introduction of classroom-based assessment, or we call Pentaksiran Bilik Darjah, PBD. PBD moved away from relying only on final examination. Instead, it focused on continuous assessment throughout the learning process. PBD encouraged teachers to observe students' progress over time and provide formative feedback. It supports a more holistic evaluation of students, including knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values. At the same time, schools are using more performance tasks, project-based learning, and student portfolios. These assessment methods allow students to show their understanding through investigation, problem-solving activities, group work, and presentation. These are important skills in STEM education. These changes are also aligned with the goals of our national education philosophy. The aim is not only to produce students who score well in exams, but to develop individuals who are knowledgeable, creative, critical, and ethical, and able to use science and technology responsibly. In this sense, assessment should support learning, not just rank students. This shift also changed the role of teachers. Teachers are no longer seen only as people who deliver content and supervise exam. They become professional evaluators who use their judgment to assess students' understanding, skills, and development continuously. This gives teachers a more important and meaningful role in the education system. However, even though the philosophy behind this reform is strong, there are still challenges in practice. One major challenge is teachers' workload. Continuous assessment requires teachers to collect evidence, record observation, prepare reports, and manage documentation. Without proper support, this can become overwhelming. When teachers spend too much time on paperwork, assessment may feel like an administrative burden instead of a tool to improve learning. If this happens, the real purpose of classroom-based assessment may be weaker. Another challenge is consistency and reliability. Because classroom-based assessment depends on teachers' professional judgment, there may be differences in how standards are interpreted. Different teachers or schools may assess students differently. Without clear guidelines, proper moderation, and ongoing professional development, teachers may feel uncertain or pressure. This is especially true in a system where examination culture is still strong and society continues to value exam result highly. In conclusion, STEM-oriented assessment in Malaysia is well aligned with modern view of science and learning. The philosophy behind it is strong and meaningful. However, its success depends on how well it is implemented and supported in schools. Assessment reform must come with realistic expectation, trust in teachers' professional judgment, and strong systemic support. Only then can assessment truly function as a powerful tool to support learning in STEM education, not just as a way to measure achievement. So I think that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, panelists three, for that wonderful thought. Well, what we see is an emerging classic pattern where ambitious philosophy heavy structural constraints. Well, studies such Rahman et al. In 2021 in the Journal of Science and Mathematics Education in Southeast Asia confirms that teacher workload and assessment documentation remain a major barriers to sustain round two, where I would like to each panelist to revisit their theme but critically elaborate what must change if STEM to succeed? If STEM is to succeed for teachers. So I would like to ask panelist one. We're back to panelist one, Saudara Iskandar. Please take and what systemic support is missing, please.
Thank you, Mr. Sahir, for the important question. So, philosophically, I agree. The reforms are strong. In fact, Malaysia's STEM agenda is unusually well aligned at the level of ideas. The challenge is not what we believe in, but whether the system we have built allows those beliefs to be lived out in practice. In my perspective, Malaysia's STEM will only succeed if philosophical alignment is matched with institutional coherence. At present, there is a growing gap between curriculum vision and systemic reality, and this gap is experienced most acutely by teachers. At present, there is by teachers. So the first one, the core issue, reform without structural recalibration. So STEM reforms require teachers to operate in fundamentally different ways. The first one, interdisciplinary thinking instead of siloed subject. Inquiry and design instead of linear lesson delivery. Collaboration instead of individual lesson ownership. And reflection and interaction instead of fixed scheme of work. However, the institutional structure surrounding teachers have not been recalibrated to support this shift. In other words, we have changed what teachers are expected to do, but not sufficiently changed the condition under which they work. This creates what I would call philosophical compliance, but practical contradiction. So the second issue is missing systemic support. What teachers actually need. Let me outline several critical forms of systemic support that are currently insufficient. So the first one, protected time for interdisciplinary planning. STEM is by nature interdisciplinary, yet most teachers are still operating within rigid timetable, subject-based fundamental silos, department silos, and heavy teaching loads. So without protected scheduled time for interdisciplinary planning, STEM integration becomes superficial. So teachers may be asked to integrate science, mathematics, and technology, but they are rarely given the structural opportunity to do so meaningfully. So true STEM requires collective intellectual labor, not isolated individual effort. So the second one, reduction of curricular and administrative burden. Another major constraint is curricular overload. Teachers are expected to design inquiry-based lesson, manage project-based assessment, integrate technology, document evidence for accountability, and respond to ongoing administrative demands. So this creates a serious misalignment. A system that values creativity, inquiry, and experimentation can overload its teachers with routine curricular compliance. Without reducing non-instructional workload, STEM risks becoming an additional burden rather than a pedagogical transformation. The third one, clearer curriculum guidance without over-prescription. Many teachers face uncertainty regarding the depth of STEM integration expected, the balance between content coverage and inquiry, and how STEM outcomes are assessed. So what is needed is clearer curriculum guidance that supports for professional judgment, not rigid script. Teachers need exemplars, shared design frameworks, and conceptual clarity, while still retaining autonomy to adapt to local contexts and student needs. The fourth one, stable and coherent professional development pathways. Professional development is often fragmented, short-term workshop, one-off initiative, and limited follow-up. STEM reforms require long-term, coherent professional learning pathways, not episodic training. Teachers need opportunities to gradually build interdisciplinary competence, experiment safely, reflect on failures, and refine their practice over time. So without continuity, professional development becomes performative rather than transformative. So the third issue is teachers are co-designers, not just implementers. This is where research becomes especially relevant. As highlighted by Noraini Idris et al. In 2020 in the Malaysian Journal of Mathematical Science, curriculum reforms frequently fail when teachers are positioned merely as implementers of externally designed policies rather than as co-designers of educational change. So this finding is crucial. When teachers are treated only as implementers, what will happen? The first one, ownership is low. The innovation is also cautious and the reform is reduced to compliance. Yet, when the teachers are treated as co-designer, their professional agency will increase, the conceptual adaptation will improve, and the reforms become more sustainable. So this aligns directly with the philosophy of science itself. The fourth issue is honoring the philosophy of science for teachers too. If we truly take the philosophy of science seriously, the science is experimental, revisable, reflective, and socially situated. But here is the critical question. Do we allow teachers to experience reform in the same way we expect students to experience science? To honor the philosophy of science, teachers themselves must be allowed to, the first one, experiment with pedagogy, revise their approaches, reflect on failures, and engage in professional inquiry without fear of punitive accountability. A STEM system that demands innovation from teachers but denies them the freedom to experiment is philosophically inconsistent, in my opinion. The fourth issue is the risk, STEM as rhetoric rather than reality. Without these systematic supports, there is a real danger that STEM will become the first one, a policy slogan, a curriculum level, or only a checklist item, rather than a lived pedagogical culture. In such condition, teachers may adopt STEM language without deep practice. Teachers also may comply symbolically without conceptual change, and teachers may experience reform fatigue rather than professional growth. So this doesn't reflect failure of teachers, but it reflects misalignment of system design itself. So to answer the question directly, yes, philosophically, Malaysia's STEM reforms are strong, perhaps even exemplary, but philosophical sense must be matched by systemic realism. For STEM to be genuinely sustainable, the system must protect teachers' time for collaborative design. The system must also reduce clerical and administrative overload and provide clearer yet flexible curriculum guidance. The system must also establish coherent long-term professional development, and the system must reposition teachers as intellectual partners in reform. Only then does STEM move from being declared in policy to being lived in classroom. And only then do we truly honor the philosophies that inspired the reform in the first place. I think that's all from me. Thank you. I will give back to the moderator.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you so much, panelist one, for that wonderful thought. There is a very powerful reversal, I would say. Teachers must experience the same inquiry culture expected of students. So, panelist two, I would like to ask, what will real classroom level support look like?
Thank you, moderator, for the great question. When we discuss STEM education, it is important to move beyond implementation and focus on sustainability. Introducing STEM initiative is one challenge, but sustaining them over time in real school context is a much greater one. From the perspective of teacher, sustaining STEM requires not enthusiasm alone, but systemic and structural support. First, teacher need realistic curriculum pacing. While STEM encourage deep exploration, inquiry, and project-based learning, the reality is that many teachers are still required to cover an extensive syllabus within limited instructional time. When curriculum pacing is too rigid or overloaded, teachers are forced to prioritize contents coverage over meaningful learning experience. As a result, STEM activities may be reduced to one-off project rather than embedded instructional practice. For STEM to be sustained, curriculum document and lesson pacing must allow flexibility for exploration, experimentation, failure, and reflection, all of which are essential components of authentic STEM learning. Second, there must be strong alignment between STEM practices and examination reform. One of the most frequently cited barriers by teachers is the tension between innovative teaching and high-stake examination. If assessment continue to emphasize factual recall and algorithmic problem solving, teachers will naturally revert to traditional teaching methods, especially as examination approach. Sustainable STEM require assessment that value inquiry skill, data analysis, problem solving, creativity, and reasoning. When teachers see that STEM-oriented skills are assessed and rewarded, they are more likely to integrate these approaches consistently rather than treating them as enrichment activity. Third, teachers require continuous mentoring and professional support, not just one-off workshops. While short-term training can raise awareness, it is, it is insufficient for deep pedagogical change. Teachers need ongoing guidance from instructional coaches, experienced mentor, or STEM specialists who can support lesson design, classroom implementation, and reflective practice. Continuous mentoring helps teachers build confidence, especially when integrating engineering design, computational thinking, or interdisciplinary projects. It is also reduce the fear of failure, which is a major factor that discourages sustained innovation. In addition, accessible engineering toolkits and resources are essential. Many STEM activities require materials, tools, and digital platforms that are not readily available in all schools. Without access to basic engineering kits, sensor, software, or fabrication tools, STEM becomes highly theoretical, undermining its experiential nature. Sustainability depends on equitable resources distribution and teacher autonomy to adapt material creatively. Importantly, toolkits do not need to be expensive. What matters is consistent access and institutional support for hands-on experimentation. Equally important is the presence of collaborative school culture. STEM thrives in environment where teachers work together, share ideas, co-plan lessons, and reflect on classroom practices. Isolated teachers are far less likely to sustain innovative approaches. Collaboration enables teachers to distribute workload exchange expertise, and refine STEM practices over time. Professional learning communities play a critical role in sustaining momentum, particularly when they are supported by school leadership. This point is strongly supported by research Saleh et al. 2022 in the Malaysian Journal of Education report that teachers persist with STEM practicals only when principals actively protect time for collaboration and experimentation. According to the study, when school leaders prioritize administrative efficiency over instructional innovation, teachers tend to abandon STEM due to time constraints and institutional pressure. However, when principals intentionally allocate time within the school schedule for collaborative planning, peer observation, and reflective dialogue, STEM practices are more likely to become embedded and sustained. This highlights the critical role of instructional leadership. Sustaining STEM is not solely the responsibility of individual teacher. School leader must act as enabler by providing time, resources, emotional support, and professional trust. Leadership that values experimentation and accepts productive failure creates a safe environment for innovation. In contrast, when teachers fear criticism or performance penalties, they are less willing to take pedagogical risks. Without this enabling condition, innovation becomes episodic rather than systemic. STEM lessons may occur during special weeks, competition, or externally funded programs, but they do not become part of everyday classroom practice. Episodic innovation is fragile. It depends on individual champions and often disappears when those teachers are transferred or overwhelmed by workload. Sustainable STEM, on the other hand, require institutionalization through policy alignment, leadership support, and cultural change. Sustaining STEM education requires a shift from viewing STEM as an add-on to recognizing it as a core pedagogical approach. Teachers need realistic curriculum pacing, assessment alignment, continuous mentoring, access to appropriate tools, and strong collaborative culture. Most importantly, they need school leaders who actively protect time and space for innovation. When these conditions are met, STEM practices can move beyond isolated initiatives and become a lasting part of teaching and learning in Malaysian school. Thank you from me.
Well, thank you so much, panelists, too. You are suggesting that leadership culture matters just as much as pedagogy. So I would like to ask panelists three, final word on sustainability and system design, please.
Okay, thank you, moderator. For STEM reform to be successful and long-lasting, teachers must receive real support from the education system. It is not enough to introduce new policies or announce new initiatives. Many educational reform fail not because the ideas are weak, but because teachers not given the proper support and conditions to carry them out in real classroom. One of the biggest challenge teachers face today is assessment overload. Continuous assessment and classroom-based assessment are good ideas. They help teachers monitor students' progress and support learning. However, problems arise when teachers are required to complete too much documentation. Many teachers need to record different type of evidence, update online system, prepare reports, and meet several reporting requirements at the same time. When administrative work takes up too much time, assessment can become more about completing forms than improving learning. Teachers may feel stressed and overwhelmed. Instead of focusing on helping students understand concepts, they may focus on meeting deadlines and filling in data. To solve this problem, assessment system need to be simplified. Reporting requirements should be clear and reasonable. Digital systems should be easy to use and designed to support teachers, not add extra pressure. Reducing administrative load does not mean lowering standards. It simply means allowing teachers to focus on teaching and guiding students effectively. Another important issue is teachers' autonomy. Every education system needs accountability. However, too much control can limit teachers' professional judgment and creativity. STEM education requires flexibility. Teachers need space to try new teaching methods, design projects, and adjust lessons based on their students' needs and school condition. If teachers are only expected to follow strict instruction, they may feel restricted. STEM learning may become too structured and less meaningful. But when teachers are trusted as professionals, they are more willing to innovate, collaborate with college, and improve their practice. This is also about how we see teachers. If we see them only as implementers of policy, reform, reform, reform will remain surface level. But if we see them as knowledgeable professionals, they can play an active role in shaping meaningful change in education. Another key issue in STEM from reform is equity. STEM education depends on access to technology, laboratory equipment, reliable internet connection, and safe learning environment. However, not all schools have equal access to these resources. There are clear difference between urban and rural schools, between well-equipped and under-resourced schools. When resources are limited, teachers often need to improvise. Some may use their own money to buy materials. Others may redesign activities to match what is available. While this shows dedication, it is not fair or sustainable in the long term. If these inequalities are not addressed, STEM reform may increase the gap between schools. Students in well-resourced schools may benefit more, while others may have fewer opportunities. From an ethical point of view, education reform must ensure fairness and equal opportunities for all students. Looking ahead, several types of support are necessary for STEM reform to succeed. First, school needs specific funding for STEM resources and equipment. These include laboratory, materials, digital tools, and updated technology. Teachers also need access to quality professional development programs so they can strengthen their skills and knowledge. Second, administrative workload must be reduced. Teachers need time to plan lessons, prepare meaningful assessment, and engage with students. Time is essential for quality teaching. Third, collaboration should be supported in a structured way. STEM connects science. STEM connects science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. However, teachers often work separately within their own subject. Schools should provide shared planning time so teachers can work together and design integrated projects. Industry exposure is also important. Partnership with industries and organizations can help teachers understand current STEM practice and new technologies. This makes classroom learning more relevant and connected to real-world application. Curriculum flexibility is another key factor. Teachers should have some freedom to adjust lesson based on students' interests, local context, and current development in science and technology. If the curriculum is too rigid, it limits creativity and meaningful learning. Finally, mentoring and continuous professional development are very important, especially for new teachers. Early, early career teachers may find STEM teaching an assessment challenge. Support from experienced mentors can help them build confidence and improve their skills. In conclusion, STEM reform is not only about changing the curriculum or adding new tools. It represents a deeper change in how we understand teaching, learning, and professional practice. The success of STEM reform depends on whether teachers are empowered, trusted, and properly supported. When teachers feel valued and respected as professionals, they are more motivated to contribute positively to change. Teachers should not be seen as obstacle to reform. Instead, they should be seen as key partners in shaping the future of education. Only then can STEM education truly prepare students to face a complex, uncertain, and rapidly changing world. So I think that's all from me for this topic. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, panelist three, and to all the panelists. So let me conclude by returning to our three philosophical anchors. The first one, philosophy of science, where STEM reframes science as inquiry-driven, creative, socially embedded, and tentative, where teachers embrace experimentation, exploration, and experimentation alongside theoretical understanding. Second, philosophy of technology, where STEM reframes technology as innovation, integration, innovation, integration, identifies expectations. And last but not least, the philosophy of national science education, where STEM aligns schooling with national development, Industrial Revolution 4.0, and also the technological readiness, where teachers become agents of transformation. And also, our panel had revealed the innovation against the examination, the policy vision against the classroom reality, the autonomy against the accountability, the urban against the rural resources, and also the professional growth against the workload, where these tensions define the everyday life of Malaysian science teachers. Well, members of the floor, the STEM-driven revision of Malaysia's national curriculum has enriched pedagogy, redefined teachers' quality and identity, strengthened inquiry learning, and also aligned education with national development. Yet it has also intensified workload, exposed inequities, demanded rapid upskilling, and also challenged assessment culture. Ultimately, STEM reforms will succeed not through documents alone, but through how well Malaysia support its teachers philosophically, structurally, and professionally. Teachers are not merely implementers of policy, but they are the interpreters of philosophy in practice. So I would like to ask each panelist one simple sentence to conclude about our e-forum today. Let's start with panelist one. Just a simple sentence.
To conclude my discussion today, I would like to thanks to all science teacher out there. Thank you for choosing the profession. Thank you for carrying knowledge with compassionate, and thank you for teaching science with all your heart. That's all.
Panelist 2, what do you say?
Okay, to conclude our discussion today, I can say that STEM education demands comprehensive and systemic support at every level of implementation, which is realistic curriculum, pacing, and a well-aligned assessment ensure that innovation strengthen learning rather than overwhelming teacher and student. Continuous mentoring and professional development empower educators to refine their practice with confidence and consistency. That's all.
And finally,
Okay,
panelist 3.
okay. For me to conclude this forum, I have some message to science teachers. Okay, as a science teachers, our role today goes far beyond delivering facts, formulas, and experiments. We are shaping how students think, question, and make sense of the world. In a rapidly changing and uncertain future, science education can no longer rely on memorization and examination-driven learning alone. Current trend in science education emphasize STEM integration, inquiry-based learning, critical thinking, and meaningful learning experience. However, these expectations also come with real challenge, including heavy workload, limited time, and unequal access to resources. For this reason, reform in science education cannot succeed if it is re- if it is placed solely and on the shoulder of teachers. I think that's all from me. Thank you.
Well, lastly from me, I would like to say let us move forward not just as a future scientist or engineers, but as a thoughtful human being who committed for using knowledge wisely. So I, Muhammad Sahir bin Shamsuddin, as your moderator, would like to thank such a big thanks to our panelists. Panelist 1 is Iskandar Mirza, panelist 2 Muhammad AFZAM, panelist 3 Muhammad ALISYAKAR for sharing their thoughts and spending their time for our forum today on trends and issues in science education. Well, members of the floor, see you in other time. Goodbye. Assalamualaikum. Thank you.